Hi everybody, my name is Chris Glassman, and today I'm here to talk a little bit about the jazz etude that I wrote for 2020 and 2021's Texas All-State Jazz. So this etude is in the style of bebop and swing, and it is written over the chord changes for Billy Strayhorn's Take the A Train. My main goal with writing this etude is I wanted to show how bebop style, bebop language, and bebop voice leading are technically possible on the bass trombone. And I want to give students a spring off point to start learning bebop and swing ideas for their own soloing. And yes, I did say soloing on bass trombone. I'm going to highlight a little bit on some of the best practices for getting the most out of your performance of this piece for your All-State. The first thing I want to recommend all students do is check out some recordings of Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie, because they really sort of defined this bebop sound that I wrote the etude off of. And if you give it a listen, you'll hear a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about in this particular video in real time. In addition to that, it can be very helpful for you to check out artists on the trombone that have adapted the bebop style. These trombonists include J.J. Johnson, Slide Hampton, Curtis Fuller, and more recent trombonists like Steve Davis, Michael Dees, Conrad Herwig, James Burton III, the list goes on and on and on. There's so many amazing trombonists. In addition to that, I'd like to recommend a couple of bass trombonists who are popular in the bebop style. A couple that come to mind immediately are Max Seigel and James Borowski, are two examples of musicians that play bass trombone and specifically specialize in playing bebop ideas and vocabulary on the bass trombone. Some of the best practices for performing in the bebop style include a more linear and smooth approach to playing your continuous string of eighth notes. And what I mean by that is that many students often think that part of the swing style is that each individual note gets a puff of air, but that's generally not the case for bebop style. I like to think about my air as a continuous flow. I call it whole note air, and my tongue is just lightly chopping up the air in a legato style, but be sure that you're still getting clear articulation on each note. It's very similar to a sprinkler. As a sprinkler is going, the water stream is continuous, but there's that little chopper on it. And all that does is just chop off the water just for a quick second so that I can turn the sprinkler. That's how I think about approaching my air for a bebop sound. In addition to that, I like to think about the points of emphasis in each of the phrases, especially the high notes, because in bebop style, the high notes get the most emphasis. If you take a look at the etude, at measure 15, you'll hear this line. I think about leaning into the top note of that phrase, especially because that's a very distinctive bebop sound. The higher that the tessitura goes, and the more that you're playing on an offbeat, the more you want to emphasize notes. The ultimate goal for this etude was to give students a little bit of a jumping off point for ideas that they can start to incorporate into their own soloing. You know how I mentioned earlier that it's actually okay to solo on bass trombone? Well, it is, and now there's an even huge resurgence of bass trombonists learning how to improvise soloing, including myself and many of my colleagues. As I mentioned earlier, it can be very, very helpful to take a more linear whole note air approach to playing eighth note lines. And in particular, if you're thinking about the last four bars, if you're playing the all-state cut, be sure to think about blowing through all of those low notes as you play up with a clear, light articulation, because that will get you the most distinctive bebop sound, which I'll try and demonstrate. I'm thinking with very similar to how you would approach one of the Bordoni Melodious Etudes. One final thing I would like to emphasize for all students, because jazz is an oral tradition, I highly emphasize that all students practice their etude, not with their instrument actually, but with just snapping on 2 and 4 and singing the etude. If you can snap on 2 and 4, sing the etude, and feel like you're really swinging, you're well on your way to learning this etude. I hope you found this helpful, and if you're interested in learning more about bebop, bass trombone, jazz bass trombone, or soloing on the bass trombone, check out 8V Bebop, as well as my own personal YouTube channel, Chris Glassman, or my website, chrisglassmanmusic.com. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you.